So my first strategy is, I thought about some behaviors that I want to reward in class. And one of them with 120 students at 8 a.m. is on-time arrival. Even at 9 a.m., on-time arrival is a challenge, and even 10, 11, 12, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On-time arrival is a challenge. So, but I said, okay, I want to reward this behavior. Well, how can I do that? Okay, so what I'll typically do is I'll put either a silly question from worst case scenario, which is fun because they want to find out how do you reduce body odor if you don't have any deodorant, or what are you really supposed to do in a bear attack, or what do you do when you have a jellyfish sting, or whatever it might be. Okay, so I'll pick something like that, and then we just find out together. Or more typical is I'll have a review question about the previous session. And this gets back to the redundancy issue you were talking about. I don't have to spend any time reinforcing the key point from the last lecture. I've got a slide up as students come in that says, based on what we talked about in the last lecture, what's true, or what's false, or which of the following, or whatever. Okay? So there's some way of sort of hammering home what we've been talking about. And I also will put up, as it says here, assignment description details, because that drives me nuts. That is my personal pet peeve. If I've written you an assignment description and I've posted it on the website and I've said download it, please don't ask me. Now, if it's unclear, what do you mean by page? Okay, if we have a Bill Clinton in there, okay, depends on what the meaning of page is. Then fine, I'm game for that conversation, but don't ask me how many sources when it says 10 to 12 sources. So we'll put that up there on the quiz, and I'll see people open their laptop and go to the website. But at least I don't really care how they got the right answer. I just care that I didn't have to deal with my pet peeve. It got reinforced another way. Okay, and then this is a quiz question, okay, which means there are points assigned to answering it correctly. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So this matters. Okay, and then let's try it. Let's see. We didn't even check to see if these are hooked up right, but again, let's just give it a try. So Rick uses the on-time slide to do which of the following? Provide a silly icebreaker, review course content, review assignment requirements, or all of the above. So go ahead and chime in. Let's see if it's working. We didn't even get a chance to pre-test it. Did we set the channel right? And no. Yeah, it's easy. Okay, so it's not quite working. It might be a channel assignment. Let's see what the channel is. Do we know? 7. Okay. Let's do a quick channel assignment. You're going to hold down channel until it blinks, then hit 07, then hit channel again.
Which one's channel?
Or go. It'll either say channel or go.
And then 7?
Depending on the model. Is it not set?
I put channel in 7. Do you want me to do it again?
What are the class sizes that most of you are dealing with while they're syncing this thing up? 45? 85? 96?
400?
You have 400? There's a space on campus that'll do 400?
Yeah. 3
Wow.
5.
Wow. We have a winner. Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, so yeah. But, I mean, technologically, the software would handle it. And I've been in auditoriums. I haven't had a class of 400, but I've taught my class in a classroom that seats 300. And you can shoot in from the lobby in terms of the radio frequency. So it should not be an obstacle because there's not even line of sight issues. So, all right, we're up and running. You want to chime in? Let's see. Yay! Okay. All right. Let's see how we're doing here. All right, and there's a countdown feature, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to set that and some. You can set it as a default, so for every slide you create, it's automatically going to be there, and that's nice. And typically, what I'll do is either start the count right away if it's an easy question or it comes off of something they already should have studied, or with a more complex real-time live question, I'll sort of see where we're at, and when about 50% have figured it out, I'll click in. But we'll talk even more about that. And then, of course, you get real-time data display. Hopefully you've seen that. And you guys are smart. And some folks wanted to have fun and put the wrong answer in on purpose. And there you go. Okay. And what's really fun, and I've tried to develop a culture in my class, if we get 100% on a real question, we get to give ourselves a round of applause. And it is really funny because I'll ask a bonehead simple question, and out of 120 students, we've had 99, we've had 98, and you can see people looking around going, seriously? And it's great because the reinforcement is not having to come from me, you know? And I'll make fun of that person, but I'm not making fun of that person, and I'm not pointing them. I don't know who it is, but I'm just going, sorry, dude, or I'll say something like, I hope that email was important, because you're clearly not engaged, clearly not paying attention. And it's fun. But then, and I had one student last year who was really funny because you can also have 2 right answers. And so it came in, and that was 100%. And he said, "Does that count?" And we negotiated whether this would count, because it was 2 right answers. But I let it count, and then he led the applause for the class. And it was, but it's fun. But there's some humor, there's some competition that come in. Because the data gets displayed in real time. Okay, strategy 2 is to harness some great materials that I didn't have to spend any time developing. There's wonderful interactive quizzes, there's wonderful crossword puzzles and all sorts of things on the textbook website. Yeah?
I'm kind of curious, right now, how would I have verification that my clicker is actually working in this?
You'll get a green light if it's talking to the computer. Okay? During a response window.
During the response window.
Yeah, so during that countdown, until it says 0, you'll get a green light. So what I remind them early on in the semester is don't look at the screen, look at the clicker. And then we do a couple of practice quizzes, and I send out, we use Blackboard, and there's a way to upload grades. And so I do a couple of practice quizzes, and I say, if you have a 0, and you were there and you had a green light, let's talk or let's work something out before class. But normally, like I say, the nice thing is after a couple of days of maybe some glitching with some registration stuff, it's good to go. And it's real stable. So the other thing I do is, as I said, try and harness some stuff that I didn't spend hours and hours developing, which is the textbook website. Because if you tell students, hey, go to the textbook website, there's some great comprehension checks for the chapters, you get a kind of, okay, sure, no way. But if you say, you're gonna know what the quiz questions are likely going to be because I'm going to pull 30% of my quiz questions from the textbook slides, from the textbook questions. Well, then they've got a reason to get out there and do those and go, okay, here's the true-false he's going to ask, or here's the multiple choice that he's going to ask, and I'm ready for the quiz. And then hopefully maybe they go, oh, there's an interesting flashcard system. This course has a lot of vocabulary. Maybe I'll bookmark the flashcards, those kinds of things. So you're just trying to put them in a position for success. They might avoid that positioning, but at least you've done your job without a lot of effort. So this one comes right off of the textbook website. So this is an example of a question I didn't have to develop. Qualitative research preserves the form and content of human interaction, is not empirically based, is interested in isolating one aspect of the communication phenomena, aims for objectivity. Now, that doesn't make any sense to you because you didn't go to the textbook website, but they did, and so they would answer. And and since you guys are so smart, I'll finish it up. Here we go, come on. There. And there we go, we got bars, and we've got a right answer coming in. There it is, and good. So most of you got that right, and it doesn't really matter, but that's the kind of quality of a question that I don't have to worry about, and they've already seen it before. And obviously I'm picking the ones that I think are most important, so it's showing a focus. Strategy 3 has to do with lecture comprehension. And again, we're dealing with dense material. My basic thought process is typically the following. If given what we've just talked about in this lecture, if this is true, what would happen in this situation? Okay, so it's an application kind of a question. It's a critical thinking next step kind of a question. That's not rocket science, but let me just take you through how it would work. So, for example, if we're doing this qualitative research thing, one of the first methods I talk to my students about is how to do an effective interview. And that gets us into what's a good research question about communication and how do you make somebody feel comfortable and all that sort of stuff. So we get into all of that, how to do a good interview. And then what happens is, so I'll talk about different kinds of questions you can ask. You can ask experience questions. What would I see you doing? You can ask opinion and value questions. What do you think should have happened in that situation? And obviously, I elaborate much more than I'm doing now. But we go through these slides, and we talk about, we can talk about feelings questions and how'd that make you feel, and we can talk about what's the difference between an opinion and a feeling. And an opinion is cognitive, and a feeling is emotional, and we want to understand all those dimensions so we really understand what it's like to be going through whatever communication challenge you're going through. Whether that might be divorce or a deployed spouse or a deployed significant other or whatever we're talking about. Okay, well then, and we keep going. And then we go, you can ask local knowledge questions. How do you know when somebody's trying to steal? If you're talking to somebody who works third shift at a convenience store, how do you know when somebody's getting ready to try and do something nefarious? Sensory questions. What are the smells in your world? What are the sights in your world? What are the other issues? And then we can talk about background. And then I come up with this slide. Okay, so now we've talked about the types of questions and what they get at. And then I say, okay, assume your boss asks you to dinner, and the invitation seems to have romantic or sexual implications. How would you respond? And then I say, this is an example of what type of question? My remote is having trouble talking. All right. And you guys are all clicked in. And so we'll see the data come out. And let me see if the slide may be an error on my fault. Yeah, I goofed up on my PowerPoint there. The grid, the picture should have gone away forever, and the response should have come up permanently, but that's on me. So now, I'm not sure what most of you said. Let me see if I can get that. Yeah, so most of you did say behavioral. Good. Well, the reason I have this question is most of my students will say value, opinion or value, because they see it as an ethical dilemma. But the question is asking, what would you do in that ethical dilemma? So I pick my hard stuff. I pick my confusing stuff to ask questions about. Does that make sense? Because if I can catch where they most likely are going to trip outside of the class while we still have time to correct it, I can say, no, look carefully. This is asking for a behavior, even though it's an ethical dilemma. Now, what you guys thought of was the follow-up question. Why would you behave that way? Now we're getting into opinions and values. When I ask them to justify their behavior, what opinions or values was that behavior based on? So you guys just thought of the next question, but this question dealt with behavior. And we talk about why you would want to get that behavior out on the table first as an interviewer and then dissect it with them in the interview. Okay? So it provides, more lecture material. Now, if they get it all right, I can say, great. But most of the time, this is a 50-50 or worse. And by the way, when you get a 50-50, that's really fun because class is really looking at each other to see who's right on this one. And they point fingers, and it's good. It's good stuff. And then the other thing that I'll do is I'll do worksheets. I've got a one-page worksheet for each of the chapters in the textbook, and I've got some sample journal articles that they read in order to kind of understand, again, they're majors. They need to be able to read the primary literature in the major, or at least begin to be able to dissect a journal article and take it apart and understand it and apply it and all those sorts of things. So we'll do that, and I'll have a one-page worksheet on those. And I think I'll show them later because we didn't launch Microsoft Word yet, and I don't want another glitch. So I'll show them at the end if you want to see them. But they're typical kinds of comprehension questions, application questions, opinion questions. Did you find what was the most effective part of this article for you, et cetera. Now, some of those are going to potentially be some discussion questions that won't show up. But what I typically try and do is take deeper, more ambiguous questions, but then somehow be able to say, if you wrestled with this stuff properly, you'll probably be able to see your answer in one of these multiple choice. Okay, and so for example, question 4A was likely what violation? There's a list of violations of bad interview questions, interview questions that violate good research protocol, and they had to apply that list to a question. Now, I'm not sure what happened. Okay. I'm not sure what happens there. And we got a nice little glitch there. I cut and pasted this in. I guess that's what happened. But So if you look at this, you can see question 4A is likely what violation? And it's social, knowledge, slang, none of the above. And we see a knowledge question. Now that doesn't make any sense to you because you don't have the worksheet in front of you and you didn't do your homework. Okay? And that's why that's so vague. The reason that question is so vague is because the folks that didn't do the worksheet and didn't bring it in have it's absolutely random for them. Whereas if I show the question, they're going to be able to make an educated guess. Does that make sense? So in that case, it's purposely vague, purposely clueless for those folks that didn't prepare properly. Because again, I'm trying to pick out behaviors I want to reward. And the behavior I want to reward is prepare for class on a daily basis. Be here on time, you get an extra credit point. Read, bring in the worksheet, and this was a no-brainer, or at least should have been pretty easy to connect. Okay. All right. Now, where do I? How many of you have seen Bloom's taxonomy in some shape or form? I mean, most folks have had some general, quick exposure to it. If you haven't, it's definitely worth looking up. There's a ton of diagrams for it on the web, and some of them are in a pyramid. I like this one because it talks about the learning goals, and then it gives some verbs associated with the learning goals, and then it gives some assignments associated with those learning goals. Okay, well, if you've seen it, then you know that at the top is evaluation, and at the bottom is knowledge or recall. Sometimes it's called recall. Can we recall it? Can we comprehend it? Can we apply it? Can we analyze and synthesize with it? And can we evaluate with it? And obviously, in most situations and in most content areas, those are cumulative. Can you remember it? Do you understand it? Can you apply it in situations that have some range of variety to them? And then so on. And we call the top three, of course, the higher order thinking. Well, so what I'm going to try and do in the worksheets then is give them things to wrestle with at the application, synthesis, analysis, and evaluation level. I'm not going to ask them a simple recall question on the worksheet. But if they get the analysis, synthesis stuff right, they should be able to answer an application question or a simpler question based on that same issue that I raised in the worksheet. Okay, so this is that's my challenge when I create the worksheets, is how do I take this stuff and then be able to anticipate a question that'll fit within Turning Point so that they get rewarded for having done the higher end homework at home. Does that make sense? And it's working pretty well. I mean, again, I don't, they don't sing songs about me in the hallway, but I think in general they would say it's a pretty predictable system. They know what class is going to be about. They know what's going to be rewarded, and those kinds of things. So as I said, what I'm trying to do then is invert the taxonomy, and instead of working my way up it, I'm working my way down it. What kind of a multiple choice question can I pull from this evaluation exercise that I asked them to wrestle with for homework? Okay. All right. So the other thing that I'll do, and this works especially nice if for some reason you're running ahead of schedule. So I try and leave room for it every year, but this is something that I'll cut if we have, like we had a snow day to kick off the semester. First day of class was a snow day. In Wilmington, North Carolina, you have to understand we have no plows and no salt. So, they cancel at the Weather Channel's faintest prediction of snow, and it's just crazy. But it was okay. It was kind of a real deal. So I'm already a day behind, so I'm going to have to figure out. But usually if I've got the time that I want, then I'll have them generate some questions and try and find some time myself or work with the work study student to kind of sift through these questions and eliminate some redundant ones and pick some good models that students came up with that are very much like the ones that I'm going to have on an upcoming exam. So, and occasionally I'll take some real off-the-ball questions just to kind of show them, hey, somebody thought this was good. And we have to be careful. But it gives me a perception check about what they thought was most important. It's a nice interactive activity for them to kind of work together as a group. You guys have Chapter 8, come up with 3 questions. You guys have Chapter 7, come up with 3 questions. And so it's a good interactive exercise from that standpoint. And then I'll let them see their questions, which of course kind of reinforces the importance of that activity. And it also gives me something to draw on. So that's another way to use the clickers. And of course, they've got to tell you the page that the answer comes from and all those good things to make it a good activity. So here's some other miscellaneous tips. For me, the quizzes are both a pedagogical strategy, that is a teaching strategy, and an assessment strategy. I hope you see the distinction there. It's like the difference between, if you've ever read any of the writing across the curriculum literature, there's writing to learn and there's writing to display learning. Okay? And they make a very clear distinction between that kind of process writing, that kind of pedagogical writing, and an assessment evaluation approach to writing. And so I'm doing the same thing with the quizzes. So for me, the quizzes are a teaching tool, not just an assessment tool. So I do allow some mild chatter, especially on the ones that are real time in the lecture. I mean, obviously, turn to your neighbor, figure out what might be the right answer here is great. Okay, but even in some of the homework questions, I'm not going to be walking around with chrome glasses doing the state trooper thing. I just don't want to present that climate, and I don't want the daily quizzes to seem punitive. They're a reward and a reinforcement. Okay, but I do have some humorous slides to kind of minimize just blatant cheating. If both of you have done the homework and we're sharing answers to see what we thought was right, that to me is fair game. But I didn't come in with my homework and so I'm mooching off of you. That's not fair game. And so I have some slides about that and point out that the person who's being cheated on is as much a problem person, because you've got to be able to assert your boundaries and have difficult conversations. And so I tie all of that kind of stuff in to the culture of the class. Okay. The other thing that I've done, and this has been huge, I would say this was the one thing that turned the clickers from a negative thing to a positive thing on my year-end reviews. This was the move. And the move was you get 1 point for any answer. You get 2 points for a correct answer. As soon as that happened, as soon as I was rewarding showing up and guessing, but rewarding more, content mastery and excellence. But as soon as I was rewarding showing up and guessing, they love it. And, that way if a question isn't quite perfect, I go, oh, come on, it was 1 point. You still got a point. And so that's been great. The other thing that allows me to do is, because any answer is going to get them a point, a 0 for the day means you weren't here. Okay? And so I've got my attendance embedded in the quiz structure. I don't have to do a separate thing. If they come in late, they don't have to track me down, because I say, look, if you answered the last question and you got 1 point for the day, you're in. So, and if you came well after the last question, because I'll typically have some staggered throughout, you came too late to get credit. And that's pretty fair, unless somebody says, it's a car accident or something like that, and we talk. But, and the other thing that I've done to deal with life, clickers in my other purse, or it's in my car. I mean, I've had folks come in and go, I was in a car accident. It's in the trunk at the garage, at the body shop, whatever. We work some things out. But I'll put as you can see, I've got a 0.5. So if I'm manually entering a grade, okay, because your battery died, that's going to be a 0.5. So I'm going to put, I'm going to give this guy class average. What's your name? Michael. Michael's going to get class average for that day's quiz. 8 out of 10 was the class average. You're going to get an 8.5. Or maybe 7.5, depending on my mood. Okay? So you're going to be right around class average with a 0.5. And that tells me legitimate technology issues. But he better go to the bookstore, get that battery replaced, and be up and running on Friday. And I've had folks, take a couple days to get batteries. And what they see from me, without any angst, is just lower and lower scores. So you don't get it Friday, it's a 4.5. And you don't get it the next day, it's 2.5. And all of a sudden they realize, I better get my battery. But I'm not giving them the 0, so I don't look like the baddie. They didn't get an absence, but they have to get on there. Okay? And then obviously we deal with athletes, and what do I do with them? Again, I'm not, with 120 kids, I'm almost always going to have 2 to 3 athletes in the class. I don't have time to do all the special things that the athletic department would love for me to do. I just don't. I mean, I'm sorry. You've already got study halls. You've got them on the bus for 8 hours. Talk to them then. I don't have that time. So what I do is I say, it's your job when you get back from travel to email me. You can tell me if you won. You can tell me if you played well, but just remind me you missed a quiz. And at that point, I'll go in and I'll plug in a manual grade with a 0.7 that says this was a legitimate athletic travel. And I've got their schedule. I can check it, but I'm not going to remember to check it when I've got 120 kids and I've got 8 minutes to upload grades before the dean wants to talk to me about how we have no money. You know, I've just got a small window to deal with this quiz, getting this quiz up, okay? And then point 6 is like a medical for me. So I can instantly look at a code and go, okay, point 6, point 6, point 6, this was the broken leg, you know, and this is covered. And that allows me to do some other stuff. And in my Excel spreadsheet, I've obviously got some notes too to myself. But this is a nice way to put placeholders in a way that keeps things running smoothly for me. Now, what I typically also do, and as you saw me do, I'll typically read. I read them a little faster than I normally would because we weren't really worried about comprehension with these questions. But I read them in a pretty animated tone, loud and clear for ADA and LD compliance issues. If you know, that's not official, but it's just my way of saying, okay, everybody should be here. If you have dyslexia, I read it for you. If you've got ADD issues, it was up there for you to look at, and I read it for you. So we should be good to go. I can count on being able to say 20 seconds left to kind of count this thing down. And I've had most students who need time for the exams, additional time for the exams, say the quizzes are going fine. You know, because I think I'm reading it with them and we're going okay. Now, one of the other things I'll recommend if you can, if this is part of your teaching persona, but I like to inject some humor, again, because the material is so dry and so challenging. So oftentimes I'll have some humorous responses as a way to kind of lighten the mood and create some camaraderie in class. So here's an example, okay? So I'll show them, we talk about the whole notion of term papers need to be arguments, not just encyclopedia entries. So I say, okay, here's an example. This paper examines several definitions of interpersonal communication and compares them and contrasts them on key aspects. I say, well, that sounds good. I mean, I'd give that a good grade. And then I say, well, let's look at this one. After comparing and contrasting the major definitions of interpersonal communication, I argue that Woods offers the most useful definition for improving interpersonal communication. And then I say, talk amongst yourselves, decide which is the better passage. And then I cut to this question, which example was better? Example A was better, example B was better. I didn't realize this would be a quiz, so I play Farmville. My group already wants to kick me out. Okay? And they start laughing and they chime in. But the nice thing is this is a subtle reinforcement of some classroom expectations. You know, that laptops are okay because some people really do take some good notes on them, but Farmville's not. And your group is mad at you, not just me, that you're being a loser. You know, and so I can get into their face a little bit more with this kind of an approach than I would with laptops away, clickers out. You know, I just don't find that that's a very useful approach. Okay. Oh, there we go, and boom, and boom. So we're good. And so we get there slowly but surely and reinforce the classroom norm while finding out which example was better, and we move on. So that's a pretty good sequence of events. One of the things you guys might want to do, and if a bunch of you decide to kind of get together and jump in on this stuff, a useful thing to consider is let's talk about defaults. And this might be something to talk about with a teleconference with Turning Technologies or some more experienced users, but really finding out what can we do as defaults that most of us would want to do. A friend of mine and I, a colleague of mine and I, you know, we were early adopters in our department. We sat through several of the web-based conferences learning about stuff and flipping through the manuals and kind of looking at what we could set for each slide. And so the timing, the 20-second timer can be set as a default. And you can set it for any amount of seconds you want to set it for. Okay, so some of the other things that can be set as defaults are useful. Unfortunately, and again, I'm not a salesperson, so I can talk about what I wish and that it doesn't have, is that the automatic correct answer indicator is not a default. So I have to manually activate that every slide, which is a little bit of a frustration. It's no big deal, but you have to click down and say, you know, right answer indicator every time. I wish that was a default because I always want to be able to show them what the right answer was. But most of the stuff can be a default, and that's really helpful as you create your slides.
Are all the questions that you asked already planned, or do you just use it as an impromptu mechanism? And if so, I don't see a yes/no response. Do you say yes is one and no is two?
Yeah, typically there'll be a number next to a yes or a no.
But if do you always have a slide for it? a question?
My personal approach has been prepared questions. The software allows for impromptu questions. There's a way, let's see if it activates when I move the mouse.
F9.
F9? Yeah, if you go there, you can create a question on the fly. Let me see.
To your right.
And we're going over here.
A little bit more. There you go.
Insert an on-the-fly question.
So
you
you're just lecturing and you want to get a sense of whether a point was understood and you ask a simple yes, no. or one or
Right.
yet, rather than do a show of hands.
Correct.
You-
Yeah, you could do that. I typically anticipate those and put them in but that's more of a comfort level thing. That's not one choice is better than the other. It's just that I don't want to have to turn around and try and go back to the computer station, manipulate the mouse, make sure I'm going to get this thing right and all that stuff. So I've kind of this is pretty muddy. I know which stuff I lecture about is muddy, and so I've got those in there ahead of time. But you can. You can do it. And occasionally I've done that when it came out of their class discussion in a more controversial way than I anticipated. So if I've had them talking and then there's this real way, no way kind of thing going on, that's when I would want to jump to this. But if it's me and I know it's muddy every time, I'll just prepare a question. That's a good question though. And let me see if I can. Oh, I got to get off of here. Now I don't know whether we've got time. It's almost 2 o'clock, but I'm not leaving till tomorrow. So I've got time. If you've got time, if you want to turn making this more of a workshop thing, we can talk about general questions first, and then I can work with folks, or you can turn to other folks in your content area, or don't even need to be in your content area, and kind of go, okay, let me imagine a slide that I might do. And one of the things that I learned from my dad, he taught theater for many years, and he was frustrated because he would always have to teach the history of theater, which he was a working actor, and so the history of theater was boring for him too. And so one of the things that we talked about, he wanted to have a group project in the class, and he was trying to say, I'm thinking about doing it here, and I said, Dad, what do you hate teaching? He said, the history of theater. I said, that's what the group project has to be about, because they're going to hate it too. So go ahead and say, make Roman theater interesting. Just pick one interesting thing about Roman theater and bring it back to us. Take one thing about Renaissance theater. I don't care if you talk about the whole chapter. Just what's one thing out of the Renaissance era of theater that you find interesting, bring it back to us and make it come alive. And that was basically the group presentation. And they could create a movie if they wanted to. They could do a live presentation if they wanted to. They could do all sorts of crazy stuff if they wanted to. Okay? And what it did was it took the stuff that he hated to talk about anyway, put it on them to make it interesting, and the whole thing kind of jammed. So what I would say is, think about the stuff that is that's your biggest struggle to teach, and then think about ways in which a worksheet question or a class activity discussion or something would help work it out that could culminate in something like a turning point, question. All right.